From the start, I was the one they forgot. I'll never forget the day my childhood therapist looked straight at my parents and said, "Emily's not struggling because she's withdrawn. She's struggling because you don't see her." I was just 13, knees tucked to my chest, in that cold office chair, silently begging for anyone to hear me. My mom rolled her eyes and said, "We love both our kids the same." But I knew better. My older brother Jake was the golden boy, star quarterback, student council president, the kind of kid parents brag about to strangers in grocery store lines. He got a brand new car on his 16th birthday. I got a scratchy secondhand sweater that smelled like a stranger's closet. At Christmas, his gifts came wrapped in ribbons and shiny paper. Mine looked like last-minute clearance bin pickups if they showed up at all. No matter how hard I tried, I was always in the background. Not quite invisible, but never important. At family dinners, Jake told stories while everyone laughed and listened. I could have vanished mid-meal and no one would have noticed. I wasn't rebellious or dramatic. I was just quietly fading away, forgotten in my own home. That's the kind of childhood you don't outgrow, you outbuild. But back then, I only knew one thing for sure. If I ever wanted to be seen, I'd have to make my own spotlight. Leaving was the easy part. Becoming someone was the hard part. By the time I turned 17, I had a plan. It wasn't grand or glamorous. It was survival. I wasn't trying to prove anything to my family anymore. They weren't watching anyway. I just needed to get out of that house and start a life that actually felt like mine. College became my lifeline. I had quietly applied to a top tech program in New York City, and by some miracle landed a full-ride scholarship tuition housing, even a small monthly stipend. No one in my family even knew. While Jake packed for Stanford, with Mom and Dad proudly footing the bill, I folded thrift store sweaters into a duffel bag and left for the East Coast in silence. I moved into a cramped dorm room on the Upper West Side with peeling paint, shared bathrooms, and a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I waited tables at night and studied by the glow of my borrowed laptop until the sun came up. I lived off instant ramen and dollar pizza slices, sometimes skipping meals to afford subway fare. But I was building something. Classes were hard, sure, but coding made sense to me in a way people never had. It was structured, logical, and fair rules applied the same way, no matter who you were. When my professors handed back projects, mine were always among the top. I started to believe I wasn't just good, I might actually be exceptional. Senior year, everything came together. I graduated at the top of my class and just 2 weeks later signed an offer with a cybersecurity firm in Manhattan. It wasn't some startup in a basement. This company handled digital security for major banks and even federal agencies. My role, back-end systems developer. It was the kind of job that people dream about after years of grinding, and I landed it before my diploma ink had even dried. I started small debugging legacy code, running tests, writing patches. But within a year, I was leading projects that entire teams couldn't crack. I'd found my lane, and I was flying. Promotions came fast. Bonuses followed. I stayed quiet about my success. No social media updates, no calls home. Not because I was hiding, but because no one ever asked. By the time I was 30, I was living in Brooklyn, eating at restaurants that didn't serve food in paper wrappers, and sleeping in a bed that didn't double as a couch. Then came the big one after managing a multi-million-dollar systems integration for a global bank. I got a bonus big enough to finally buy a home. Not rent-own. The place was a dream. A 2-bedroom brownstone condo in Fort Greene with original brick walls, sleek hardwood floors, and a kitchen that felt like something out of a design magazine. I hosted a little housewarming party before Christmas. Just a few friends, the ones who'd watched me crash on their couches, pull coding all-nighters, cry over rejections, and celebrate every little win. We sat on floor cushions eating Thai takeout straight from the containers, laughing until our faces hurt. "Here's to Emily," my friend Lisa said, raising a glass of cheap red wine. The quiet one who turned silence into power. And in that moment, surrounded by love and warmth I had built from scratch, I felt something I hadn't known. I was missing peace. I had clawed my way out of the shadows and built a life filled with purpose, friendships, and finally freedom. And the funny thing was, no one in my family knew any of it. They still saw me as the weird, quiet girl in the background, but they were about to find out who I really was. Coming home. Wasn't a homecoming. I hadn't stepped foot in my parents' house in over 8 years, and honestly, I never thought I would again. But then out of the blue, my cousin Sarah called me in early December. She'd somehow gotten my number from a mutual friend, Emily. She said, her voice softer than I remembered, "Your mom's been asking about you. They want you to come home for Christmas." I didn't answer right away, just sat there in my apartment staring at the floor. For years, not a single word from any of them. Not a birthday call, not even a text. And now suddenly they missed me. Still something in me said yes, not out of sentimentality. I wasn't chasing any hallmark moment. I think I just wanted to see if they were still the same, or if somehow, by some miracle, they'd changed. The week before Christmas, I packed up gifts, thoughtful ones, things I knew they'd like, and made the 6-hour drive from Brooklyn to the worn-out streets of the Seattle suburb I used to call home. I pulled into the driveway just after dark. The house looked exactly as I remembered, peeling siding, overgrown hedges, and a flickering porch light that still hadn't been fixed. I rang the doorbell with more nerves than I care to admit. The door creaked open. My mother stood there stunned for a second. "Wow. It's really you," she said, giving me a quick, stiff hug. "You look different." Inside, not much had changed. Same stale smell of potpourri, same faded family photos on the wall, same old couch with the springs poking through. The living room was already full of relatives. The room went quiet the moment I stepped in. I caught snippets as I passed. "Is that Emily? She's wearing sweats." I wasn't, of course. My black wool coat and tailored slacks were what some folks would call quiet luxury, but subtle things like that never landed with my family. Then Jake came bounding out of the kitchen like he was still the homecoming king. Everyone he announced with a wide grin, "This is my wife, Megan," and that he placed a hand on her belly, "Is your future niece or nephew." There were congratulations and hugs all around. I smiled politely and said, "That's wonderful," but he didn't stop there. He turned to Megan and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Emily works in tech, probably still coding in some basement somewhere." Laughter rippled through the room. Same old Jake. Mom directed me to set my things down. "Jake's using your old room as his office now, so you'll be sleeping on the couch." Of course I would be. Dinner that night was the usual parade of passive-aggressive jabs. Aunt Carol asked if I was still tinkering with computers. Uncle Bob offered me a dishwasher job at his diner, Honest Work. He said like I was unemployed and directionless. I smiled and answered every question with grace. "I build enterprise-level cybersecurity systems," I said, "mostly for Fortune 500 companies," but no one was listening. Jake was pitching his latest business idea to the whole table like it was Shark Tank. He needed $200,000 in startup capital, and our parents were nodding along, offering their full support like it was already a done deal. Later, when it was time to hand out gifts, I watched Jake and Megan unwrap expensive presents one after another. My mom cried happy tears over a designer handbag I had picked out just for her, but when it was my turn, the mood shifted. "Oh no," my mom said too loudly. "Emily, we completely forgot." Jake laughed, just like old times. "Try not to cry this year." I didn't cry. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out a sleek keychain, held it up for them all to see. "This," I said calmly, "is the key to my new apartment. I closed on it last week." Silence. My dad blinked. "You bought a place with what money?" "From my job," I replied. "We just licensed a framework I built to a major international bank. My share was about $150,000 after taxes. You could have heard a pin drop. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet girl in the corner. I was the woman who came back on her own terms, and they had no idea what to do with that." The moment everything changed. Christmas morning started the same way it always did in the Turner household. Jake and Megan bounding down the stairs like kids, loud and glowing, tearing into presents with everyone watching and laughing along. The gifts were stacked in neat piles for everyone but me. I sat quietly at the edge of the couch, nursing a lukewarm coffee, while wrapping paper flew around me like confetti. I'd spent hours picking out thoughtful gifts for everyone: Mom's favorite handbag, a vintage baseball cap for Dad, a smart baby monitor for Jake and Megan's coming arrival. I didn't expect fanfare, but I also didn't expect what happened next. Mom turned suddenly, eyes wide in performative shock. "Oh no," she said too loudly. "Emily, we completely forgot to get you something." Jake burst into laughter like it was all some great inside joke. Just like when we were kids, he grinned. "Try not to cry this time, Em. You're an adult now. Remember?" I didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Something inside me shifted, not sadness, not even anger, just a deep, unmistakable clarity. I reached into my purse, pulled out my keychain, and held it up between my thumb and forefinger. The brushed steel caught the morning light, quiet but firm, just like me. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone calm, "I bought myself something this year." They all turned confused. "This is the key to my new apartment. I just closed on it last week." Silence spread through the room like a cold wind. Mom squinted. "You bought—" "An apartment," Dad frowned. "With what money?" "From my job," I replied. "My company just licensed a cybersecurity framework I developed to a major international bank. My cut was $150,000 after taxes. You could have heard a fork drop." Megan's mouth fell open. Jake's face lost its usual smugness. Dad leaned in like he was trying to hear better, as if I'd just spoken a different language. "Wait," Mom said, her voice catching. "You made $150,000 in a bonus." I nodded. "That's just the bonus. My base salary's been 6 figures for a few years now." They didn't know what to do with that. My mother, who once laughed when someone offered me a job washing dishes, suddenly looked like she might faint. Dad's eyebrows shot up in disbelief, and Jake clenched his jaw tight like he'd just bitten into something sour. Then came the switch, fast and desperate. Mom stood up and wrapped me in a hug that felt more like a sales pitch than affection. "Sweetheart," she gushed. "Why didn't you ever tell us? We're so proud of you." Dad chimed in. "Jake, did you hear that? Your sister works with Fortune 500 companies." Jake didn't say a word. He just stared at me like he was trying to solve a riddle he didn't like the answer to. Mom sat down beside me, her tone syrupy. "So tell us about this new place. How many bedrooms? What's the neighborhood like?" 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. "In Fort Greene," I said, steady and unbothered. "Close to my office." "Oh, we should visit," Mom said quickly. "Family should stick together." I almost laughed. Now we were family. That morning, everything flipped. For the first time, they looked at me not as a ghost, not as the quiet disappointment in the background, but as someone powerful, someone they wanted something from. And I saw them clearly too, not just as flawed parents and a smug brother, but as people who had underestimated me so completely that they didn't even recognize who I had become. I smiled gently, set down my coffee, and said, "Actually, I've got a long drive ahead of me. I should start packing." As I walked upstairs to grab my bag, I heard them whispering hushed, urgent voices. Something told me they weren't done yet. They weren't ready to let go. But neither was I. Not yet. Not until I finished what I came to do. When they finally noticed me, but only for what I could give. By the time I finished packing my overnight bag and came downstairs, the entire energy in the room had changed. My parents sat a little straighter. Jake had that strange forced smile he wore when he wanted something. Megan was whispering in his ear like they were plotting something. I knew that look. I'd seen it every time Jake wanted to manipulate a situation to his advantage. Dad stood up first. "Emily," he said, stepping toward me like we were about to have some heartfelt moment. "Before you go, there's something we wanted to discuss." I paused, suitcase in hand. "Okay." He cleared his throat. "We're really proud of how far you've come. Truly. And we were thinking maybe there's a way we can all support each other now, as a family." There it was. I felt it coming a mile away. Mom chimed in. "It's about Jake's startup. You know, the one he's been working so hard on." I said nothing, just waited. Jake took over. "Look, Em, it's a solid concept. Disruptive tech, huge upside. I just need some capital to launch. We're talking ground floor opportunity here." "How much?" I asked flatly. He didn't hesitate. "Just $200,000, $1,000. Which, let's be real, with what you're making now, is practically pocket change." The gall of it hit me like a wave. These were the same people who once laughed when Uncle Bob offered me a dishwashing job. The same ones who clapped when I was told to find steady work while they toasted Jake's admission to Stanford. Now they wanted my money. I let the silence stretch. My mom's smile was trembling at the edges, her hands fidgeting in her lap. My dad was trying not to look pushy, but he kept glancing at Jake like he was the chosen one all over again. "No," I said finally. Mom blinked. "What do you mean?" "No, I mean," I repeated, "I'm not giving you any money." The air thinned. Dad's brow furrowed. "But we're family." I set my suitcase down and folded my arms. Where was family when I had to find my own apartment the day after graduation? When you paid for Jake's tuition and left me to figure it out on my own? You had money for him. Mom raised her voice. That was different. We didn't have the same financial options back then. I stared straight at her. You had plenty for Jake. You saw potential in him. You saw nothing in me. Jake exploded. "You selfish brat. After everything this family did for you, what exactly did you do?" I shot back. "Raise me, feed me. That's parenting, not charity. And you made it very clear for years I wasn't wanted." I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. They followed, still protesting. Mom reached out one more time. "You'll regret this." I turned, looked her in the eye, and said calmly, "I won't." And I meant it. I drove the 6 hours back to Brooklyn in silence, stopping once at a rest stop just long enough to block every number I needed to. Calls, texts, guilt trips, all gone. All except Sarah, who later texted me, "Heard what happened. Sorry about them. Don't be." I wrote back. This was the best gift they ever gave me. Freedom. That night, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine in hand and the city glowing beneath me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry or hurt. I was free. Not because they let me go, but because I finally chose to walk away. Finding my people. Finding my peace. Back in Brooklyn, I returned not just to my apartment, but to my life. A real life. One I had built with my own hands on my own terms, without anyone's approval or applause. And while my blood relatives were miles away, fuming over their bruised egos and empty hands. I was exactly where I belonged. That night, I met up with my friends at our usual wine bar in Fort Greene. It's nothing fancy dim lights, worn leather booths, fairy lights strung along the ceiling, but to us, it was home. These were the people who saw me through coding meltdowns, late-night pizza-fueled debugging marathons, and the heartbreaks of growing into yourself in a city that never slows down. We toasted with cheap sparkling rosé and shared stories like we always did. When I told them everything about Christmas, the forgotten gift, the pitch for money, the sudden shift from rejection to fake praise, they didn't gasp. They nodded. They understood. Lisa, my ride or die from grad school, leaned across the table and said, "Good riddance. Honestly, Em, they sound toxic as hell." Another friend asked, "Do you think you'll miss them?" I thought about it for a second. "No," I said truthfully. "I think I've been mourning the family I never really had. This just made it official." We raised our glasses again. "To chosen family," I said. "To chosen family," they echoed. In the days that followed, I braced for fallout, and it came. A flood of texts, not from my parents or Jake, but from cousins, uncles, aunts I hadn't heard from in years. The message was the same. How could you abandon your family? Jake's just trying to build something. You should help him. We always knew you were selfish. One by one, I blocked them all. Every number, every guilt trip, gone. Except for Sarah. Sarah was different. She called that afternoon, her voice full of weariness and quiet support. "Jesus, Em," she sighed. "The whole family's imploding. Your mom called everyone, told them you're rich and refusing to help Jake. Now they're all acting like you've betrayed them." I didn't even blink. "Good," I said. "Let them. She says you've forgotten where you came from." "She's right," I said, laughing. "I came from a place that told me I'd never be enough. I'm not going back there." Sarah was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I'm proud of you." "For what it's worth." "It's worth a lot," I told her. "You're the only one I care to stay in touch with." "Are you really okay cutting them off?" she asked. I took a breath, looked around my apartment, the soft light over my dining table, the stack of books I'd chosen for me, the life I'd created. "Sarah," I said gently, "I cut them off 8 years ago." This just made it official. Weeks turned into months, and peace became my new normal. No more bracing for judgment. No more pretending I didn't notice the silence. I woke up in my own bed, drank coffee on my balcony, and watched the morning sun hit the skyline. I had space, I had calm, I had a life. And then one day I met someone. His name was Ethan. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop near my office. He was sketching logo ideas on a napkin while waiting for his Americano. A freelance designer with a quiet warmth and a gentle way of listening, he understood what it meant to start over. He too had walked away from a family that never truly saw him. It didn't take long before our connection grew into something real, steady, respectful, healing. Work was thriving. I'd just been promoted to lead systems architect for an AI security integration project. The pay bump was great, but what mattered more was the creative freedom, the trust of my team, the sense that my ideas had weight. Everything they said I'd never have, love, respect, success, belonging, I had finally found. Not in them, in me, and in the people who chose me back. Living the life I built, not the one I was given. About a month ago, Jake somehow got a hold of a new number and called me. "Hey, Emily," he said, trying to sound casual. "Thought we could catch up. Madison should meet her aunt. Things are tight right now. Mom and Dad's house needs work." I didn't ask how he got my number. I didn't ask what the damage was. I simply hung up and blocked him. And I felt nothing but peace. Because everything they said, I'd never have love, stability, success, I built with my own 2 hands. I built it while they ignored me, laughed at me, and counted me out. They're still spinning stories, telling relatives I'm ungrateful, saying I forgot where I came from. But the truth is, I remembered exactly where I came from. That's why I never went back. My old bedroom. It's now a nursery for Jake's baby. But this apartment, this life, this one finally feels like mine. Sometimes the family you're born into will never see your worth, not because it's not there, but because they've never bothered to look. And that's not your burden to carry. So choose you. Build the life that reflects your value, not their version of your story. Surround yourself with people who show up, who listen, who love you, not for what you give, but simply for who you are. Have you ever had to walk away from someone to find your peace? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Let's remind each other we're not alone in this. And if this story spoke to you, hit subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose ourselves.